A black man is barbecuing in the park with his children when a racist white woman comes up to them and demands that they stop. When the black man refuses, she does something shocking. The grill crackled as Michael Turner flipped the sizzling burgers, the savory scent of smoke drifting into the breeze. Brianna and Jaden played tag around the picnic table, their laughter ringing out across the park. It was a perfect Saturday afternoon, the kind that made the stress of the work week feel distant and irrelevant. Michael smiled, adjusting his apron as he turned the burgers. "Daddy, can we play on the swings later?" Brianna asked, running up to him and tugging on his sleeve. "Sure thing, sweetie. But first, let's get these burgers done. You're gonna need your energy after all that running around." Brianna grinned and ran back toward her brother, their giggles mixing with the peaceful hum of the park. Families scattered around, enjoying the warm spring air, while the distant sound of a dog barking echoed faintly. The day couldn't have been more perfect. That's when she appeared. Michael noticed her out of the corner of his eye, a white woman, briskly walking on the path that looped around the park. Her face was set in a frown and her eyes were locked on them. He didn't think much of it at first. People sometimes glanced their way, mostly just curious. He was used to that, but this time felt different. As she approached, her steps slowed. Michael kept his focus on the grill, hoping she would just walk by. He could feel her presence looming near the table. And then, as expected, she stopped. "Excuse me," the woman said, her tone laced with that subtle condescension he knew all too well. "You can't barbecue here." Michael turned slowly, raising his eyebrows as he faced her. The woman was probably in her mid-40s, fit from her daily power walks, and dressed in a bright pink tracksuit. Her eyes darted between him, the grill, and his children, her disapproving frown deepening. He smiled politely, trying to keep things light. "Actually, we've got a permit. Barbecuing is allowed in this area of the park." The woman crossed her arms, unimpressed. "I've lived here for over 20 years, and I know for a fact that it's against the rules." Michael resisted the urge to sigh. He kept his voice calm. "I double-checked with the park office before setting up. It's all in order." She narrowed her eyes. "Well, by the time I finish my walk, you'd better be gone. I don't care what your paper says." Her tone left no room for interpretation. This wasn't about the park rules. Michael looked at her, holding her gaze for a moment longer than necessary, and then nodded slowly. "Have a good walk." He turned back to the grill, effectively ending the conversation, but he could still feel her standing there, hovering as if waiting for him to change his mind. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, she huffed and continued down the path, her footsteps fading into the background. Brianna ran up again, tugging on his shirt. "Daddy, who was that lady? Why did she sound mad?" Michael bent down to her level, keeping his smile gentle. "Oh, she was just confused, sweetheart. Everything's fine. Let's focus on our food, okay?" Brianna nodded, though her curiosity lingered in her eyes. She ran off to play with Jaden again, but Michael couldn't shake the feeling that the woman would be back. It wasn't the first time something like this had happened, and he knew it wouldn't be the last. Still, he wasn't about to let someone ruin their day. The burgers were nearly done, and the kids were having fun. That was all that mattered for now. The grill crackled again, and Michael took a deep breath, refocusing on the moment. He could still feel the tension from the encounter settling in the back of his mind, but he pushed it aside. He had learned long ago that some things just weren't worth the energy. But somewhere deep down, he knew this wasn't over. Michael handed Brianna and Jaden their burgers, watching their faces light up as they dug in. The brief tension from earlier was fading into the background, replaced by the simple joy of sharing a meal together. The park felt peaceful again, the smell of grilled meat mixing with the fresh breeze. "Daddy, this is so good," Jaden said through a mouthful of food, his small hands struggling to hold the burger steady. Michael chuckled. "Careful, buddy. You don't want to lose that to the ground." Jaden grinned and took another big bite, content to ignore the warning. Brianna sat next to him, swinging her legs under the picnic table as she munched on her burger, her eyes occasionally glancing toward the path where the woman had walked off earlier. Michael took a seat across from them, biting into his own burger, trying to let himself fully enjoy the moment. But something about the woman's parting words lingered in the back of his mind. "You'd better be gone by the time I come back around." He shook his head, pushing the thought away. It wasn't the first time someone like her tried to assert some kind of authority where they didn't have any. Michael had been through worse, much worse, but what gnawed at him now was that his kids were there to see it. He never wanted them to feel like they didn't belong, especially not here, in a public park, doing something as simple as having a barbecue. "Daddy?" Brianna's voice broke through his thoughts. "Yeah, sweetie? Why did that lady say we couldn't barbecue here?" Michael paused, weighing his words carefully. He didn't want to burden them with too much. Not yet. "She was just confused, Bri. She probably doesn't know the rules like we do." "But why was she so angry?" Michael sighed, giving her a soft smile. Sometimes people get upset when they don't understand things, but we're not doing anything wrong, okay? Don't worry about it. Brianna nodded slowly, though it was clear she was still thinking about it. Jaden, on the other hand, seemed completely oblivious, humming a tune between bites, fully engrossed in his burger. Just as Michael was about to take another bite, a movement caught his eye. He looked up and saw her, Karen, power walking back around the bend. Her face was flushed, and the irritation from earlier had transformed into something darker, more menacing. She was back. Michael's body tensed instinctively as she approached. Her gaze locked on them like a heat-seeking missile. The kids didn't notice at first, but Michael could feel it, the storm she was bringing with her. He stood up slowly, his muscles tightening, but he didn't say anything just yet. Karen stopped a few feet from their picnic table, hands on her hips, glaring at them with barely concealed rage. "I told you to be gone by the time I came back," she snapped, her voice loud enough to make Brianna and Jaden stop eating and look up. Michael straightened, his voice calm but firm. "We're not going anywhere. Like I said, we have every right to be here." Her eyes flashed with anger. "You people never listen, do you? Always thinking you can just do whatever you want. This is a public park, and you're ruining it for everyone." Michael's hands clenched at his sides, but he forced himself to stay composed. "Ma'am, we're not breaking any rules. I showed you the permit. Now please, let us enjoy our day." Karen's face contorted with fury. "No, I'm not going to let this slide. I'm calling the police. You're not supposed to be here, and I'll make sure they know it." Jaden looked up at his father, confused. "Daddy, what's happening?" Michael knelt down beside him, putting a hand on his shoulder. "It's okay, buddy. Everything's fine." He glanced at Brianna, who looked more worried than her brother, and gave her a reassuring nod. "Yeah, you tell your kids everything's fine," Karen spat, taking her phone out of her pocket. "But they'll learn soon enough what happens when you break the rules." Michael stood up again, his patience wearing thin. "Call whoever you want. We're not going anywhere." Karen sneered at him before dialing the police. She turned her back slightly, muttering into the phone. "Yes. Hello. I'd like to report a group of people barbecuing illegally in the park. Yes, they've been warned. No, they refuse to leave. Yes, it's near the pond." Brianna tugged on Michael's sleeve again, her voice barely a whisper. "Are the police going to make us leave, Daddy?" Michael shook his head. "No, sweetie. We're not doing anything wrong. Just stay calm." Jaden looked up from his burger, frowning. "But why is she calling the police?" Michael glanced at Karen, still on the phone, and then back at his son. "Some people just don't like being told no, Jaden. But we don't have to worry about that. We'll be okay." As Karen finished her call, she turned back to them with a smug expression. "They're on their way. Let's see how confident you are when the police show up." Michael's jaw tightened. He could feel the tension building, not just in him, but in the atmosphere around them. The kids were watching, confused, and he didn't want them to see him lose his cool. But the woman's words, her tone, were digging under his skin, threatening to pull him into a place he didn't want to go. "We'll be fine," he repeated softly, more to himself than to anyone else. "We're not doing anything wrong." But in the pit of his stomach, he knew this was only the beginning. Michael stood by the grill, eyes fixed on the horizon, where he could see two police officers approaching. He could feel Brianna's hand squeezing his, small and tight. Jaden had fallen silent, his burger forgotten on the picnic table. Michael forced himself to stay calm, even as his heart pounded with each step the officers took. Karen stood a few feet away, arms crossed, a smug smile tugging at the corners of her lips. She tapped her foot impatiently, as if she were waiting for her moment of vindication. Her eyes flicked toward Michael with a gleam of satisfaction, like a predator circling its prey. The officers, both in their late 30s, arrived at the scene. One of them, a tall man with close-cropped hair, looked at Karen first. "Ma'am, we got a call about a disturbance?" Karen's voice was clipped and authoritative. "Yes, officer. This man," she pointed at Michael, "and his kids are illegally barbecuing in the park. I told them it's against the rules, but they refuse to leave. They've been here for over an hour, breaking the law. They need to go." The officer turned his gaze toward Michael, sizing him up briefly before speaking. "Sir, can we see some identification, please?" Michael nodded, his expression calm, but his grip on Brianna's hand tightening. "Of course." He pulled out his wallet and handed the officer his driver's license and the park permit. While the officer examined the permit, Karen jumped in. "Look, it's pretty clear they're not supposed to be here. I've lived in this neighborhood for years and we have rules. People can't just—" The officer raised his hand to silence her, looking over the permit carefully. He glanced at his partner, then back at Michael. "This is a valid permit. You're allowed to barbecue here, Mr. Turner." Michael nodded once, trying not to let his relief show too much. "Thank you, officer." Karen's eyes widened in disbelief. "Wait, what? No, that can't be right. He's not supposed to be here." ruining the park for everyone. Her voice rose in pitch, frustration seeping into every word. You need to make them leave. They're disrespecting the rules. The officer sighed, clearly unimpressed by her outburst. Ma'am, there's no rule against barbecuing here. This family is well within their rights to use the park facilities. Karen's face flushed red, her hands balling into fists. No, I'm not letting this slide. This is unacceptable. She stepped closer to Michael, her face twisted in anger. You people think you can just do whatever you want. You don't belong here. Michael's patience snapped. He stepped in front of his children, his voice sharp but controlled. We're not going anywhere. We have every right to be here, just like you do. Now leave us alone. Brianna tugged on his arm, her eyes wide with confusion. Daddy? He knelt down beside her, keeping his voice low. It's okay, sweetie. Everything's fine. But things were far from fine. Karen was fuming now, practically vibrating with rage. This isn't over. I'll make sure everyone knows what kind of people you are. She spat the words out, glaring at Michael with venom in her eyes. The second officer, a shorter woman with a calm demeanor, stepped forward, her voice firm but patient. Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back. There's no issue here. You need to leave the family alone, or we'll have to escort you out of the park. Karen's eyes darted between the two officers, disbelief and fury warring on her face. Escort me out? What about them? They're not the problem, the male officer said simply. Michael stood up again, putting a hand on Jaden's shoulder. Can we go back to enjoying our day now? The female officer nodded. You're good to go, Mr. Turner. Sorry for the inconvenience. As the officers turned to leave, Karen's voice shrieked after them. You can't just let them stay. You can't, but the officers ignored her, walking away toward their patrol car. For a moment, Michael allowed himself to relax, but he could still feel the tension humming beneath his skin. He knelt down beside his kids again, giving them a reassuring smile. See? Everything's fine. Let's finish up here and maybe go get some ice cream later, huh? Jaden grinned, nodding enthusiastically. Brianna's smile was smaller, more uncertain, but she nodded too. As Michael stood up, Karen still hadn't moved. She stood a few feet away, seething in silent rage, her hands clenched into fists. He could feel her eyes burning into his back, but he refused to engage with her any further. Eventually, she stormed off. For now, it seemed like it was over. But something told him this wasn't the last he'd see of her. The police officers walked away, their calm footsteps growing faint as they moved farther down the path. Michael stood still, his eyes following them for a moment, trying to shake off the tension coiling in his chest. Brianna and Jaden clung to his sides, their small hands gripping his shirt tightly, as though the officer's departure had left them more exposed. Michael crouched down to their level, his voice soft and reassuring. Hey, everything's fine now. The police said we can stay, remember? Brianna's brow furrowed, her lips pressed together in a tight line. But what if she comes back, Daddy? She was so mad. Jaden looked up at his sister, then back to his father, wide-eyed and silent. Michael gave them a gentle smile, doing his best to exude calm. Don't worry about her, I promise. If she comes back, we'll handle it. Right now, we're here to enjoy our day. Why don't we go play for a little bit before we clean up? Jaden perked up at that, his eyes darting to the swings across the field. Can we, Daddy? Please? Michael nodded, ruffling his son's hair. Go ahead. Just stay where I can see you. The kids took off toward the playground, their laughter breaking through the heavy air that had settled over the picnic spot. Michael watched them run, but the smile he gave them quickly faded once they were far enough away. His hand reflexively clenched around the strap of his apron, the tension in his shoulders refusing to release. He glanced around the park, scanning for any sign of Karen. The woman hadn't left his mind since her outburst, and even though the police had dismissed her claims, Michael knew people like her didn't just give up that easily. There was always something lurking beneath their sense of entitlement, something ugly that couldn't be reasoned with. He turned back to the grill, starting to pack away what was left of the food. The smell of smoke still lingered, though the fire had died down. Michael worked methodically, stacking plates and folding napkins, all the while keeping an eye on the path Karen had walked down. Minutes passed, and though the tension in his gut never fully disappeared, he forced himself to focus on the simple task of cleaning up. The kids would be back soon, and he wanted to make sure everything was ready for their final snack before heading home. As he closed the lid on the cooler, he heard a sudden burst of laughter from Brianna, loud and bright from across the park. For the first time in hours, he smiled, genuinely this time. Maybe they really would get through the rest of the day without another incident. But just as that thought crossed his mind, something shifted. Michael's instincts flared up, and he turned, scanning the park again. There, in the distance, near the tree line, he saw her, Karen. She was back, standing still, half hidden by the shadows of the trees. She wasn't walking toward him this time, but simply watching. Michael's stomach knotted. It was the way she stood, unmoving, like a predator waiting for the right moment to strike. He inhaled deeply, forcing himself to stay calm. She hadn't done anything. Not yet. But the threat was there, looming, waiting for an opening. Michael looked back at the playground, where Brianna and Jaden were still lost in their game of tag. They hadn't noticed her yet, and he wasn't about to let them feel the weight of her hatred again. He stood, his mind racing with possibilities. Should he confront her? Call the police again? But as he watched her from across the park, he realized something. She was waiting for him to react, to lose his cool. That's what she wanted. He wouldn't give her the satisfaction. Michael turned back to the picnic table, finishing the last of the cleanup, all while keeping her in the corner of his vision. He wouldn't let her ruin this day for his kids. He had promised them ice cream, swings, and a good time. No one, especially not someone like Karen, was going to take that away. But he couldn't deny the pit in his stomach had deepened. This wasn't over. Not yet. The last few rays of afternoon sunlight filtered through the trees as Michael called the kids back from the playground. Brianna and Jaden ran toward him, still laughing and out of breath, their earlier worry momentarily forgotten. Michael had finished packing up most of the supplies, leaving only the grill and a few final items on the table. "Can we have ice cream now, Daddy?" Jaden asked, his voice hopeful. Michael smiled, his tension easing for just a second. "Yeah, we'll head out in a minute. Let me just get the last of this stuff cleaned up." Brianna climbed onto the bench, swinging her legs back and forth as she watched him. "This was fun," she said softly. "Except for that lady." Michael gave her a small nod, not wanting to bring up Karen again. "We're still having a good day, aren't we? Let's keep it that way." As he bent down to zip the cooler, a sudden clattering noise made him freeze. He straightened up quickly, his eyes darting to the side. There she was again, Karen, striding across the field toward them, her face twisted in anger. Michael's heart pounded as she approached, her eyes locking onto him and his family. Her movements were more erratic this time, her steps faster, more purposeful. There was no doubt now. She wasn't just going to make a scene. She had something else in mind. "Hey!" Michael called out, stepping in front of the grill. "What do you think you're doing?" Karen ignored him, her eyes narrowed and fixed on the barbecue. "I told you!" she hissed, her voice trembling with rage. "I told you to leave. You think you can just do whatever you want, don't you?" Michael's body tensed, but he didn't move, blocking her path to the grill. "We're not leaving. You need to go home." "The police already told you." Before he could finish, Karen lunged forward, grabbing the edge of the barbecue with both hands. She shoved it with all her strength, tipping it over in one violent motion. The heavy grill crashed to the ground, spilling hot coals, ash, and what little food was left across the grass. Brianna screamed, scrambling off the bench, while Jaden stood frozen, his eyes wide in shock. Michael's breath caught in his throat as the wreckage spread in front of him. The entire day's work, the food, the grill, ruined in an instant. For a moment, time seemed to stand still. Then Michael's anger surged. He stepped forward, fists clenched, his voice rising. "What the hell is wrong with you?" Karen stood there, breathing hard, her hands still trembling from the effort. But instead of backing down, she sneered at him, her face flushed with a twisted sense of triumph. "You people always think you can just do whatever you want. This is my park. You don't belong here!" Michael's vision blurred with rage. He took another step toward her, his voice shaking. "Get out of here! Now!" Karen didn't move. She stood her ground, her chin raised defiantly. "Or what? You gonna hit me? You think I'm afraid of you?" Brianna clung to Michael's leg, her small body trembling. "Daddy," she whispered, her voice filled with fear. Jaden had started to cry, his face buried in his sister's arm. Michael looked down at his children, his heart breaking for them. He wanted to yell, wanted to scream, but he couldn't, not in front of them. Not like this. He had to stay calm, had to keep control, no matter how much he wanted to unleash his anger. With a deep breath, Michael stepped back, his voice cold and steady. "You're done here. I'm calling the police." Karen's smirk faltered, but only for a second. "Go ahead, see if they care." Michael pulled out his phone, dialing 911 with shaking hands. He turned away from Karen, speaking into the phone as calmly as he could manage, though his voice still trembled with rage. "I need the police at Oakwood Park. There's been an incident. Someone's just destroyed our property." As he hung up, he looked back at Karen. Her smugness had started to waver, her eyes flicking nervously toward the entrance of the park. "You can't just—" she started, but Michael cut her off. "Stay where you are. The police are coming." Karen's face flushed again, but this time it wasn't from confidence. She took a small step back, her eyes darting between Michael and the kids. "This is your fault," she muttered, almost to herself. I warned you, but Michael wasn't listening anymore. His focus was on Brianna and Jaden, kneeling down to pull them both into a tight hug. It's okay, he whispered. Everything's going to be okay. Brianna's voice was barely audible. Is she going to go to jail? Michael didn't answer. He didn't know. All he knew was that this day, this peaceful afternoon he'd promised his children, had been ripped apart by someone who couldn't stand to see them happy, someone who couldn't let them be, and it wasn't over yet. The sound of sirens echoed through the park, growing louder with each passing second. The wail of sirens cut through the park like a knife, sending birds scattering from the trees. Michael held his children close, trying to soothe their trembling bodies. His heart was still racing, but he forced himself to stay calm for their sake. He couldn't let them see how rattled he really was. Karen stood a few feet away, her arms crossed defensively. She wasn't sneering anymore, but her eyes still flickered with anger. As the patrol car pulled up to the edge of the park, she shifted on her feet, her earlier bravado quickly fading into something closer to fear. The two officers, Officer Grant and his partner from earlier, stepped out of the car and approached, their faces grim. Michael felt a rush of relief as they drew closer, though it was tinged with the same tension that had been simmering all day. Grant reached them first, taking in the scene with a quick glance. His eyes settled on the overturned barbecue, the scattered food, and finally on Karen, who had gone pale under his gaze. What's going on here? Officer Grant asked, his voice steady but firm. Michael stood up slowly, still keeping Brianna and Jaden close. She came back after you left, he said, gesturing toward the wrecked grill. She tipped over the barbecue. Ruined everything. Grant's jaw tightened as he turned to Karen. Is that true, ma'am? Karen's eyes darted around, looking for an escape, but there was none. They provoked me, she stammered, her voice shaking now. I told them to leave. They were being aggressive, and I didn't mean to. Grant held up a hand, cutting her off. Ma'am, we already told you earlier that Mr. Turner and his family are within their rights to be here. You were asked to leave them alone. Now you've returned and caused damage to their property. Karen's face flushed deep red, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. This isn't fair, she cried, her voice rising in pitch. You're taking their side. I was just trying to keep the park safe. That's enough, Grant said, his voice hardening. He nodded to his partner, who stepped forward, pulling a pair of handcuffs from her belt. Ma'am, you're under arrest for destruction of property and disturbing the peace. Karen's eyes widened in panic as the female officer moved toward her. No, you can't do this, she shrieked, backing away. I was just trying to... The officer reached out, grabbing her wrists and snapping the handcuffs into place. Karen's protests grew louder, but they fell on deaf ears. Officer Grant watched her struggle for a moment before turning back to Michael. I'm sorry about this, Mr. Turner, he said, his tone apologetic but professional. We'll make sure she's held accountable. Michael nodded, still feeling the weight of the day pressing down on him. Thank you, officer, he said quietly. As the officers led Karen toward the patrol car, her voice shrill with protest, Michael turned his attention back to Brianna and Jaden. They were watching everything unfold, their eyes wide and unblinking. Daddy, Brianna whispered, her voice shaky. Why is she going to jail? Michael knelt down beside her, his voice soft and soothing. Because she did something wrong, sweetie. When people do things like that, they have to face the consequences. But she was so mad, Jaden added, still clutching his sister's arm. Why was she so mad at us? Michael sighed, pulling them both into a hug. Sometimes people get angry for no good reason. It's not about what we did. It's about her. She didn't like that we were here, but we didn't do anything wrong. Brianna's eyes were filled with confusion, and Michael knew that his words were only a band-aid on a much larger wound. One day they'd understand the full weight of what had happened today, but for now, he needed to protect their innocence as much as he could. He stood up again, looking at the wreckage of the barbecue, the afternoon now heavy with exhaustion. The sound of Karen's protests had faded into the distance, leaving only the distant hum of the park around them. Let's go, kids, Michael said softly, gathering their things. We've had enough excitement for one day. As they began to walk toward the parking lot, Brianna clung to his hand, her voice small. Are we ever coming back here again? Michael looked down at her, his heart heavy with the weight of her question. He paused for a moment, then gave her hand a gentle squeeze. Yes, sweetie, he said quietly. We'll come back. We belong here. And as they walked away from the park, the air around them felt a little lighter, though the memory of what had happened lingered like smoke in the air. The quiet ride home from the park had been heavy with tension, the day's events replaying over and over in Michael's mind. Brianna and Jaden had fallen silent in the back seat, worn out from the emotional roller coaster. When they got home, Michael had tucked them into bed, reassuring them that everything was fine, even though he didn't fully believe it himself. Later that night, The call came. Officer Grant's calm voice had been steady on the other end of the line, asking Michael to come down to the station the next day to discuss pressing charges. The decision weighed on him as he lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, his mind spinning between the anger he still felt and the desire to simply move on. Now, sitting in the plastic chair at the police station the next day, that same weight pressed down on him. Michael's eyes wandered over the plain walls and fluorescent lights, the smell of disinfectant lingering in the air. His thoughts drifted to the kids again, wondering what they were thinking, how much they truly understood about what had happened. He'd tried to shield them from the worst of it, but there was only so much he could do. The door to the hallway opened, and Officer Grant stepped in, clipboard in hand. "Mr. Turner, thanks for coming in," he said, nodding as he gestured for Michael to follow him. Michael stood, wiping his palms on his jeans, and followed Grant down a narrow hallway to a small, plain room. The air inside felt cooler, more sterile. Grant motioned for Michael to take a seat across from him at the table. "We need to discuss the next steps," Officer Grant began, flipping through the papers on his clipboard. "After yesterday's incident, you have the option to press charges against Ms. Jacobs for destruction of property and harassment. It's entirely up to you, but I want to explain what pressing charges would entail." Michael leaned forward, resting his arms on the table. "What would happen if I decide to press charges?" Grant glanced at his notes, then met Michael's eyes. "If you press charges, Ms. Jacobs will go through the legal process, court hearings, fines, and depending on the outcome, she could face jail time. If you choose not to, the incident will still be recorded, but she won't face any further consequences beyond what's already happened." Michael took a deep breath, feeling the weight of the decision settle heavily on his shoulders. He had hoped things would feel clearer today, that maybe time would soften the anger he felt. But seeing the damage Karen had done, not just to the barbecue but to his children's sense of safety, made it hard to simply walk away. "I don't want this to drag out, but what she did was wrong," Michael said, his voice quieter than he intended. Grant nodded, his expression sympathetic but neutral. "I understand. These situations are difficult, especially with kids involved. You're not just thinking about yourself. You're thinking about how this impacts your family." Michael let out a deep sigh, leaning back in the chair. "I've spent my whole life dealing with people like her, but this time, it's different. My kids saw everything. They saw her hate, and I can't just let that slide." Grant gave a slow nod, watching Michael carefully. "I've seen a lot of cases like this, and I understand your hesitation. People like Ms. Jacobs often don't think about the impact of their actions until they're forced to face real consequences." Michael thought about Brianna's small voice, asking if Karen was going to jail. About Jaden's wide, frightened eyes as the grill had been tipped over, scattering everything they'd worked on across the ground. This wasn't just about a ruined meal. It was about protecting his kids from a world that too often told them they didn't belong. Maybe pressing charges was the only way to show them that actions have consequences, that they had the right to stand their ground. "Has she said anything?" Michael asked, his voice tight. "Has she apologized or explained why she did it?" Grant shook his head. "No apology. She claims she was just trying to protect the park, and that she didn't mean for things to go so far. But that's no excuse." Michael clenched his fists under the table, the words ringing hollow in his ears. "Of course she didn't," he muttered, more to himself than to Grant. He had heard those excuses before, from people who thought their sense of ownership outweighed his right to exist peacefully in their spaces. He closed his eyes for a moment, thinking of his kids again. If he let this go, what would that teach them? That people like Karen could walk all over them without consequences? That their experiences didn't matter enough to stand up for? No, he couldn't let it go. "I think I need to press charges," Michael said firmly, his eyes opening to meet Grant's steady gaze. Grant nodded, writing a note on his clipboard. "We'll move forward with that. Once charges are filed, you'll be kept updated on the legal process." Michael stood, his body still tense but his mind clearer. He shook Grant's hand. "Thank you, officer. I appreciate your help." Grant gave him a small, understanding nod. "Take care, Mr. Turner. We'll keep you in the loop." As Michael walked out of the station and into the fresh air, the weight on his shoulders felt a little lighter. It wasn't going to be easy, but he knew he had made the right choice, for himself and for his children. The following days passed quietly, though the tension from the incident still lingered in the back of Michael's mind, like a dull ache that refused to fade. He went through the motions, work, picking up the kids from school, making dinner, but everything felt different. It wasn't just the fallout from pressing charges. It was the awareness that something had shifted for his family, especially for Brianna and Jaden. At home, the kids seemed to be adjusting. They hadn't mentioned Karen since that day at the park, and Michael hadn't brought it up either, but he knew it wasn't over for them. The way Brianna had clung to him after the police arrested Karen The look in Jaden's eyes when he asked why she was so angry, those moments stuck with him. He had to hope that his choice to press charges would help them understand that standing up for themselves was the right thing to do. One evening after dinner, Michael found himself sitting alone at the kitchen table, sipping a cup of coffee. The house was quiet. Brianna and Jaden were playing in the living room, their soft voices carrying down the hall as they played with their toys. He stared at the steam rising from his cup, letting the stillness wash over him, but his mind was still busy with thoughts about what lay ahead. He wasn't second-guessing his decision, but he did wonder what would come of it. What would happen to Karen? Would pressing charges make her think twice about the way she treated people like him and his kids? Or would she walk away from this unchanged, just angrier, more bitter? The door creaked open softly, and Michael looked up to see Brianna standing in the doorway, clutching her favorite stuffed bear in one hand. Her hair was tousled, and she had that thoughtful look on her face that always came when something was weighing on her. "Hey, sweetheart," Michael said, his voice soft. "What's on your mind?" Brianna padded over to him and climbed up into the chair beside him, tucking her legs beneath her. She sat quietly for a moment, her little fingers absently picking at the bear's fur. "Daddy," she began, her voice hesitant. "Is that lady still mad at us?" Michael's heart ached at the question. He had hoped that Brianna would move on from what had happened, but it was clear that the encounter with Karen had left an impression. He reached over, gently placing a hand on her back. "I don't know if she's still mad, but that doesn't matter now. The police are handling everything and we're safe." Brianna nodded, though her expression stayed serious. "But why was she so mad? We didn't do anything wrong." Michael sighed softly, trying to find the right words. "Sometimes people get mad for reasons that don't have anything to do with what you or I did. They get mad because they don't understand or because they're afraid of something that's different from what they know." She was quiet again, her fingers gripping the bear a little tighter. "Will we go back to the park?" Michael looked at her, seeing both the fear and the hope in her eyes. He wanted to protect her from ever having to face something like that again, but he knew that shielding her wasn't the answer. They had every right to go back to that park, just as much as anyone else. "Yeah, we'll go back," Michael said, his voice steady. "That park belongs to all of us. We're not going to let one person take that away from us. But we'll go when you're ready." Brianna seemed to consider this for a moment. Then she gave a small nod. "Okay," Michael smiled, pulling her into a hug. "Everything's going to be fine, sweetie. We're going to be okay." They sat there for a little while longer, the kitchen quiet and calm. Eventually, Brianna hopped down from the chair and headed back toward the living room, her stuffed bear trailing behind her. Michael watched her go, feeling a sense of peace that hadn't been there before. He took another sip of his coffee, staring out the window into the darkening sky. The legal process would take time, and there was no telling what the outcome would be. But for now, he had done what he could. He had made the choice to stand up for his family, to show his children that they didn't have to accept someone else's hate as the final word. As the evening wore on, the house grew quiet again. Brianna and Jaden were getting ready for bed, their voices now soft with sleepiness. Michael stood up from the table, setting his empty cup in the sink. He walked down the hall, checking on them as they settled in for the night. After tucking them in, he lingered by the doorway for a moment, watching them drift off to sleep. There was still so much ahead, questions they would ask, moments when they would need reassurance. But Michael knew they would face those moments together. One day at a time, they would move forward. As he turned off the light and closed their door, Michael felt something inside him ease. Whatever came next, they would be ready, together. A few weeks passed, and life settled back into its usual rhythm. The kids went to school, Michael returned to work, and the incident with Karen became more of a memory, rather than a lingering shadow over their daily lives. There were still moments when the tension from that day surfaced, Brianna's quiet questions, or the way Jaden would cling a little tighter to his father when they drove past the park. But those moments were becoming fewer and farther between. It was a bright Saturday morning when Michael decided it was time to go back. He had been thinking about it for days, watching the kids laugh and play, wondering if they were ready to face the park again. And then, over breakfast, he asked the question. "So," Michael said, setting down his coffee cup and looking at Brianna and Jaden, "how would you guys feel about going back to the park today?" The table fell silent for a moment, both kids looking up from their plates with wide eyes. Jaden's fork hovered over his pancakes, while Brianna stared at her dad, her expression unreadable. "The same park?" Brianna asked, her voice soft but steady. Michael nodded. "Yeah, the same one, but only if you both feel ready. I thought it might be nice to go back and have some fun together. No rush, no pressure." Jaden was the first to break the silence. "Are we going to barbecue again, Daddy?" Michael smiled, feeling a small flicker of relief at the question. "Only if you want to. We could just play, have a picnic, whatever you guys feel like." Jaden grinned. Can we get ice cream too? Brianna stayed quiet, her gaze dropping to her plate. Michael watched her closely, waiting for her reaction. He knew that this decision would take more time for her, that she had been the one to absorb more of the fear from that day. After a few moments, Brianna looked up again, meeting her father's eyes. Will it be safe? Michael leaned forward, his voice calm and reassuring. Yes, sweetheart, it'll be safe, and I'll be with you the whole time. No one's going to bother us. She nodded slowly, processing his words. Finally, she smiled. Just a little. Okay, let's go back. The park felt different when they arrived. The air was crisp and filled with the sounds of children playing, dogs barking, and families scattered across the grassy areas with blankets and picnic baskets. There was no trace of the tension that had haunted their last visit, just the normal hum of a community enjoying a sunny day. Michael pulled the car into a parking spot near the playground, his heart lighter than it had been in weeks. He glanced back at Brianna and Jaden, who were already peering out the windows, eager to run and play. Ready? Michael asked, turning off the engine. Jaden practically bounced in his seat. Yeah. Can we go on the swings first? Brianna, though quieter, smiled and nodded. Yeah, the swings. They stepped out of the car, and Michael grabbed the picnic basket they had packed that morning, filled with sandwiches, fruit, and of course the promise of ice cream from the nearby vendor later. It felt good, this return to normalcy. As they approached the swings, Jaden raced ahead, calling dibs on the tallest one. Brianna followed, more cautiously, but with a growing excitement. Michael watched them for a moment, his heart swelling with pride. They were resilient, more resilient than he sometimes gave them credit for. Michael set up the picnic blanket under a large oak tree, with an easy view of the playground. He leaned back against the tree, watching as Brianna and Jaden took turns pushing each other on the swings, their laughter filling the air. It was the sound he had been waiting to hear, the sound of joy, unburdened by the fear and ugliness of that day. There were no suspicious glances from other park-goers, no looming threat of confrontation, just the usual ebb and flow of families enjoying the space, side by side. It felt right, and it felt like healing. After a while, Jaden came running back to the blanket, his face flushed with excitement. Daddy, can we get ice cream now? Please? Michael chuckled, ruffling his son's hair. All right. Ice cream it is. He stood up, glancing over at Brianna, who was still lingering near the swings, her gaze fixed on the pond in the distance. He walked over to her, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. Hey, you doing okay? Michael asked, his voice soft. Brianna looked up at him, her eyes thoughtful. Yeah, she said after a moment. I think so. It feels better. Michael knelt down beside her, meeting her gaze. I'm proud of you, Brianna. Coming back here was brave. You know that, right? She nodded, a small but confident smile spreading across her face. I'm glad we came back, Daddy. It's nice here. Michael smiled, pulling her into a quick hug. I'm glad too. Now what do you say we go get some ice cream with your brother? Brianna's eyes lit up, and she grabbed his hand, pulling him back toward the blanket where Jaden was waiting, already bouncing with excitement. Together, they walked to the ice cream cart, each picking out their favorite flavors. As they sat down on the blanket again, enjoying the cool, sweet treats in the warmth of the day, Michael felt a sense of peace he hadn't felt in a long time. This was how it should be. A simple day in the park, no fear, no tension, just a father and his children, laughing, playing, and sharing the little joys that made life worthwhile. As they finished their ice cream and ran off to play again, Michael leaned back against the tree, watching them with a smile. They had faced something ugly, but they hadn't let it defeat them. They had come back, reclaimed the park as their own, and most importantly, they had done it together. And for now, that was more than enough.